In Ecuador, Prosecutor Leonardo Palacios was murdered amidst the worst wave of violence in the country's history. In Brazil, the Senate approved a bill that promotes equal pay for women and men doing the same job or exercising the same function. And in South Africa, senior officials from over a dozen countries held talks with the BRICS bloc to strengthen cooperation ties. Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm Luis Alberto Matos from TeleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. In Ecuador, authorities reported the murder of Prosecutor Leonardo Palacios in Guayas, in the southwest of the country. According to preliminary information provided by the police, the prosecutor was leaving his work activities in the company of a secretary. At around 7 p.m. local time Thursday, subjects traveling in a motorized vehicle shot repeatedly at Palacios' car, who was reported dead at the crime scene due to several shots. Minutes before this attack, the Attorney General, Diana Salazar, denounced death threats against Palacios. The murder of the prosecutor occurs in the midst of a militarization in Duran City ordered by the government to reduce the rates of violence. Salvadoran President Nayib Bukele completed 4 years in power on Thursday amid several complaints over the exception regime imposed more than a year ago. During Bukele's term in office, social and political movements denounced several human rights violations. Organizations detailed that the government unleashed a serious political institutional crisis in which they affirm there has been an absence of judicial independence, militarization, and criminalization of social activism. In view of this, social movements reported more than 67,000 arbitrary detentions, of which only 5,000 citizens were released since the establishment of the state of exception. While presenting his fourth-year report before the Legislative Assembly, President Bukele made a series of announcements, including the downsizing of 262 municipalities to 44, the reorganization of the legislature from 84 to 60 deputies, and a plan for the prosecution of corruption. In Uruguay, a historic sentence was handed down against military oppressors Rubens Francia and Francisco Macaluso. Both were sentenced to 12 years and 6 months in prison for crimes against humanity. Criminal judge Maria Elvia Merlo convicted the accused as accomplices to the crimes of deprivation of liberty and repeated torture. Francia and Macaluso were denounced before the Special Prosecutor for Crimes Against Humanity by a group of former political prisoners who were detained between 1976 and 1978 in San Jose City's Armored Infantry Battalion, west of Montevideo, the country's capital. Prosecutor Ricardo Percivalle praised the judge's decision. On Friday, the ambassador of the European Union in Brazil, Ignacio Ibáñez, affirmed that Mercosur and the European Union expect to move forward with the free trade agreement. The members of Mercosur, Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay, and the EU resumed negotiations in recent months to close the free trade agreement between the two blocs that was concluded at a technical level in 2019. Ibáñez assured that Mercosur wants to reopen some issues that seem to have been agreed, but a proposal has not yet been presented. The diplomat also recognized that the arrival of the Brazilian President Lula da Silva brought about a dramatic change in this matter. He also said that even though there are no deadlines, the ideal would be to take advantage of the summit that the EU will have with CELAC, the Community of Latin American and Caribbean Countries, next July in Brussels to boost the negotiations. On Friday, the Brazilian Senate approved a bill that promotes equal pay for women and men doing the same job or exercising the same function, one of President Luis Ignacio da Silva's campaign promises. The text was presented by the government in March, approved by the Chamber of Deputies a month ago, and will now be sent to President Lula for its enactment. According to a study conducted by Idados consulting firm, women earn around 20% less than men in Brazil for the same education profile, age, and occupation category. In addition, the bill also states that in case of discrimination based on gender, race, or ethnicity, the employer must compensate the employees for the difference in salary due and 10 times the value of the new salary. In case of recidivism, the fine doubles. In Brazil, Lula da Silva's government prevented the return of Jair Bolsonaro's ministerial model. Parliament waited until the last day to vote on the presidential decree that reconfigured the government structure. The details in the following report by Andre Vieira and Sebastian Soto.
President Lula da Silva won his most important victory in Congress on Thursday, since he took office exactly 6 months ago. The Senate approved by 51-19 to maintain the model of ministries created by the president by means of a provisional measure that would lose its validity on June 1st.
It is important that the government can do it the way it was done, without increasing costs, without creating new quotas. It is in fact an administrative reorganization that goes in accordance with our commitments to the Brazilian people.
The tight time for the vote was triggered by the Chamber of Deputies. The House of Deputies, mostly made up of right-wingers, was the only legislative house to blackmail the government to free out money for parliamentary amendments. The Legislative House only approved on Wednesday by 337 to 125 votes to maintain the current ministerial structure after the release of $340 million by the National Executive for actions of the congressmen in their bases. For the deputy leader of the government in the Chamber of Deputies, the approval of the provisional measure guarantees the implementation on the policies elected with President Lula.
There are important ministries like the Ministry of Agrarian Development, for example, which was extinguished by Bolsonaro. We came back and created the Ministry of Indigenous People. We strengthened the Ministry of Environment. We practically recreated the Ministry of Labor and Employment, which are fundamental ministries. The Ministry of Women, the Ministry to Combat Racism. So I believe that President Lula is fulfilling his government agenda and his commitments. I think it was a spectacular victory.
The current 37 ministers are maintained, but the Chamber of Deputies edited the provisional measure that reconfigured them and at the same time made important sector fragile. For example, it removed the National Water Resources Policy from the Ministry of Environment and the demarcation of indigenous lands from the unprecedented Ministry of Indigenous People, while reviewing the attribution of other ministries. The popular movement stressed the importance of maintaining the current government structure, but questioned the attitude of the Congress, which until last year received public money without transparency, a secret budget in exchange for support for the government of former President Jair Bolsonaro.
It is important because it will allow the government to start working, but we are very concerned about the emptying of some ministry and the attempt to shape mainly the policies that are fundamental for the working people, such as the agrarian reform, the indigenous issues. Today we are facing the issue of the temporary measure that reorganized the program, My House, My Life, and that there were many problems that have now been highlighted, resolved with amendments, but there is a permanent tension because the National Congress is still not working. It is not favorable to the government, favorable for the needs of the Brazilian people to have access to land, to food, to work, to housing.
Lula's government ends today strengthened, but will have to dialogue until 2026, the last year of his administration, with the most conservative Congress since the end of the civil-military dictatorship in 1985.
André Vieira e Sebastian Soto, TeleSUR, Brasil.
Let's take a short break, but remember you can join us on TikTok at TeleSUR English, where you will find news in different formats, news updates, and much more. Other stories coming up, stay with us. Welcome back from the South. The United States Senate passed a bill on Thursday to suspend the nation's debt limit through January 1st, 2025, averting a first-ever U.S. default just days ahead of the deadline. The House earlier this week already passed the measure, which can now be sent to President Joe Biden to be signed into law. Lawmakers in the Senate voted 63-36 to pass said bill. Suspending the debt limit through 2025 takes the threat of default off the table until after the presidential election. In addition to addressing the debt limit, the bill caps non-defense spending, expands work requirements for some food stamp recipients, and closes back some COVID-19 relief funds, among other policy provisions. The U.S. government reiterated that it is willing to lift the unilateral coercive measures it has imposed on Venezuela if the government of President Nicolas Maduro takes concrete steps on issues demanded by Washington, such as defining the rules that will govern the upcoming presidential elections, constitutionality scheduled for 2024. According to White House Western Hemisphere advisor Juan Gonzalez, Biden's administration is trying to find another role in the Venezuelan political and to explore another route that involves abandoning the policy of maximum pressure, which was implemented by former President Donald Trump. Caracas denounces that since 2015, the U.S. has imposed, with the support of the European Union, 929 economic and financial sanctions, which have resulted in losses in the order of $232 billion, according to figures offered by Vice President TeleSUR Rodriguez on April 21st. In France, employees gathered outside the headquarters of the rail group Fret SNCF to protest on Friday as a meeting is held to discuss the future of the company. Around the rail group's headquarters in Saint-Ouen, north of Paris, the subsidiary of the state-owned rail group is threatened by an investigation by Brussels, which suspects it of having received illegal aid, which would automatically lead it to its bankruptcy. On May 2023, railway workers broke into the European Commission as part of their ongoing campaign to save freight operators, Fret SNCF. Workers feared the investigation into Fret SNCF will reduce the rail company's operation, resulting in 5,000 job cuts. On Friday, several dozen protesters opposed to pension reform gathered in the streets of the village Garonne in southern France near a civilian security airbase that President Emmanuel Macron visited. Protesters mobilizing rejection of Macron's administration management and to support workers' unions demand to abort the pension reform law. French unions are calling for a fresh national day of action to protest against the government's controversial pension reforms on Tuesday, June 6. French President Emmanuel Macron's personal ratings are near their lowest level on record for his handling of pension reform and protest, the latest polls show. The severe drought currently affecting Spain has led to a reduction in the output of agricultural products and an increase in food prices. According to data released by the Ministry for Ecological Transition and the Demographic Challenge, the country's reservoirs, which store rainwater for use in drier months, were at just 47.5% of their capacity during the final week of May, down slightly from 47.7% during the previous week. This situation has caused the prices of vegetables and beans in the country increase by 18% in the first quarter of 2023, and the overall price of food increased by 15.7% in 2022, hitting the record high since January 1994. Meanwhile, government officials pointed out that the increase in production costs and the decrease in supply are the main reasons for the increase in agricultural product prices. Ukraine carried out several attacks on Russian territory on Friday. For the first time, authorities in Belgorod reported casualties. According to Belgorod Governor Vyacheslav Gladkov, a shelling attack injured 4 people in Belgorod, and preliminary information indicated a drone crash and sparked a fire at an oil refinery further south. Gladkov also added that 8 apartment buildings, 4 homes, a school, and 2 administrative buildings were damaged during the shelling in Chebekino, a village in the border region of Belgorod. The incidents came one day after a drone attack on Moscow, where all 8 aircraft-type unmanned aerial vehicles launched were destroyed. On Friday, China's Special Envoy for Eurasian Affairs, Liu Hui, said there remain many difficulties ahead before Ukraine and Russia can sit down for peace talks, and Liu Hui also blamed for the conflict on the West, which has sent arms to Ukraine a bit to assist it in its fight against the Russian offensive, he added.
Through our business and communication with various parties, including Ukraine, we felt deeply that the only way to solve the Ukraine crisis is through dialogue and negotiation. During this visit, I also felt that the various parties all supported a political settlement for the Ukraine crisis. I just mentioned it before, maybe there are currently many difficulties for the various parties to sit down and engage in talks, but we should also see the flip side of this, which is that the various parties are not without points of consensus.
The special representative believes that both sides have not fully shut the door for peace talks.
The Russian side says it has never opposed peace talks and has always supported resolving the issue through political means. Ukraine also says it cherishes and longs for peace. I feel that the two sides have not fully shut the door to peace talks.
TeleSUR English continues to grow. You can now tune in from 33 different African countries through StarSat, dial 461 and enjoy Latin American alternative broadcasts. One functional break, will be right back. Don't go away. Welcome back from the south. On Friday, President of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro, arrived in Turkey to participate in the inauguration of his counterpart, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who on June 3rd will take office as president for a period of 5 years. Previously, President Maduro congratulated Erdogan on behalf of all the Venezuelan people for being re-elected in an electoral triumph declared officially by the Supreme Electoral Council on June 1st. President Erdogan obtained 52.18% of the votes, while opposition leader Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu obtained 47.82%. The Latin American leader emphasized that Erdogan's victory consolidates the path of complementary relations that his nation maintains. During a visit to Turkey in 2022, President Maduro indicated that the cooperation map between the two countries includes more than 50 bilateral agreements. On Friday, senior officials from over a dozen countries were in talks on closer links with the BRICS bloc as it met to deepen ties. Cuba attends for the first time a meeting of this coalition of countries made up of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. On this occasion, it does so as president of the G77 group, plus China. One of the main objectives of this event is to consolidate dialogue and cooperation among the countries of the South in order to face the many common challenges in the international field. BRICS is considering expanding its membership, and a growing number of countries, mostly from the global South, have expressed interest in joining. South African Foreign Minister Naledi Pandor said a number of topics were discussed during closed-door meetings, including the transformation of international finance institutions.
He also spoke about and supported the notion of really looking at how we can transform international development finance institutions and have a more representative voice for the developing world. How we can change the quota within the IMF, etc., to be more fair, the representation in governance structures, access to financing, which is not at a cost that leads to debt, and all those issues. We also agreed that one of the key purposes of BRICS that we'll try to encourage is really fostering dialogue as a pathway to peace and development. We believe the world needs to talk much more, even when there are troubling problems, that we could resolve these through dialogue and close interaction.
The World Health Organization warned on Friday that the death toll from more than 1 month of fighting in Sudan is undercounted. In a press conference in Geneva, WHO spokesperson Tarek Jasarevic said that the casualties reported so far over 800 deaths and more than 5,000 injured, only tallied numbers provided by the hospitals still operating in the country. Jasarevic also referred to the more than 20,000 pregnant women who were unable to access prenatal care because of the fighting. Meanwhile, the head of the Red Crescent operations in Sudan, Patrick Elliott, warned that the situation could worsen in the coming weeks with the onset of the rainy season. Elliott added that many of the camps where people who have fled their homes are staying could be cut off by water. On Friday, the Democratic Republic of the Congo government and the International Criminal Court agreed to strengthen their cooperation in the fight against impunity for war crimes. For the visit of ICC Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan, Congolese President Felix Tshisekedi reiterated this collaboration will materialize his country's aspiration to put an end to impunity. Tshisekedi emphasized that this renewed commitment reflects the will to reinforce an active and dynamic cooperation oriented towards the ideals of justice and peace. Armed groups have plagued much of eastern DRC for 3 decades, a legacy of regional wars that erupted in the 1990s and 2000s. The ICC handed down 3 sentences for crimes committed in this African nation since it began operating in 2002. We have come to the end of this news brief. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For TeleSUR English, I'm Luis Alberto Matos. Thank you for watching.